Welcome to a special episode of the Podcast Editors Mastermind Show. I'm Steve Stewart, co-founder of the Podcast Editor Academy, and today we're doing a little bit something different. I know that the show usually is a live stream, or had been in the past, and now we're doing some recordings, but today we're going to go live because this is something I think is very timely, very interesting. We need to get the information out right away. Plus, this isn't specifically for podcast editors, managers, post-production specialists. This is going to be for podcasters in general. So we're hoping to reach a bigger audience with this content. We're bringing on Jay Nachlis today. He is from Coleman Insights. I'm going to bring him on right now, in fact, so you can see him. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Hey, Steve. Good to see you.
I'm appreciative of you. He's gotten about 1,000 emails from me this week because things just keep changing on me. Let me tell you a little bit about Jay. Jay joined Coleman Insights in 2017 after more than 2 decades of experience in the industry as a program director and on-air talent. So you were what, radio DJ?
Yeah.
What kind of formats?
Let's see. I was on rock, CHR, hot AC, country. I think that's, adult hits. I think it covers most of them.
So you were at the same station that kept changing formats on you the whole time, right? That's the way it worked.
Sometimes it felt like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You've launched multiple successful brands, coached some of entertainment's brightest talent. I'd like to know can you name drop a few there?
Sure. One was, for a time, this is a funny little story, and I'll say clearly his success had nothing to do with me. However, there was a period of time before Ryan Seacrest was the Ryan Seacrest you know today that I was his program director for a few months. That was pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah, that is neat.
Yeah. And, there were a couple there were a few talent that I got to work with early in my career that I was really, really proud of that had successful careers that, when I got to Buffalo, there was a station there called Alice. In fact, I worked at 2 Alice stations. I worked at Alice at 92.9 in Buffalo and then Alice 106.7 in Detroit. And in Buffalo, when I got there, this is going to age myself here for a second, but when I got there was a box of cassettes under the desk, right, that the previous PD had left for me. And so I went in there and, that's one of the first things I do is, you're looking for part-timers. And so to do weekend shifts. And so I remember going through and just listening to air check after air check. So there were a couple, like one guy in there was a guy named Joe Russo, who was not working in radio at that time. And I hired him for part-time and he became very successful, still is. He runs radio stations in Buffalo and he was at Cumulus in Kansas City before that. He's a program director. Another one who's just a phenomenal talent and an even better human being was Jen Myers, who was on in St. Louis on the morning show for many, many years. She recently passed away of cancer, but she was just amazing and got her start with me in Buffalo.
I just moved away from St. Louis and I don't recall that name. I guess I wasn't listening to radio much.
She was on Y98.
Y98, yeah. That was a good station.
Yeah.
Oh, that's sad to hear. But times have changed, haven't they? You've now leading research into a lot of this podcasting space, especially the video side of it, since that's been exploding. You co-authored the new rules of podcasting on YouTube in 2023, and then you studied on this the state of podcasting, video podcasting, 2025, along with Amplifi Media. Can you tell us a little bit about Amplifi Media's involvement here?
Yeah, so if you go back to, so this actually started in December 2022. In fact, recently I was revisiting the emails and looking at the seedling of this entire thing. And it started in a conversation with Steve Goldstein and I. So Steve used to run programming for Saga, a radio company. That's actually when I first met him. And now Steve is a podcast consultant for his company, Amplifi Media. So we had conversations about working together and collaborating. And so this conversation back and forth in 2022 was, if we were to do a project together, what would the project be? What would the study be about? What's kind of entering the zeitgeist? What do podcasters need to know about? And what's something that we could potentially present at like a podcast movement? And that is when the idea of YouTube came about. Now, at the time, we weren't thinking video podcasting in a macro sense. We were just thinking about YouTube. And so we designed that study and as we went through the outline, thought, yeah, this could be really useful information because we see this as an emerging thing. We fielded that study months later, all came together, and it came out of the field in July, I think, of 2023. We presented it in Denver at Podcast Movement that year. And to think about now, it really makes us chuckle. There were literally 2 sessions on video podcasting in that conference, ours and one other. And now, it's amazing how the industry has kind of gone into a rocket ship in the last year and a half. And so it became a natural thing for us to do this latest study that we just presented at Evolutions for 2 reasons. One, we wanted to trend it. We wanted to see how things have shifted, certainly in the last year and a half. But then there's also a lot of new stuff to explore, including Spotify and their role and a lot of other different things that have taken place in this space. And so that's where we are today. And it was a really meaty, interesting, juicy study.
I want to get into some of these key findings from that study, but let's have a discussion about this. Everybody's talking about video podcasts now, but we've had video podcasts for almost 20 years. I think about Ask a Ninja back on, it was on Apple Podcasts as a video podcast.
Right.
Or actually, excuse me, back then it was iTunes. We didn't have Apple Podcasts before
right.
2017. So this isn't anything new. It's just, for some reason, everybody's feverish about the thing. What is it that's caused so much more conversation about video podcasts in the past 2 years than in the previous 20?
Because of the ascension of the top 2 platforms. If you look at the way people are consuming podcasts, it's always been a great thing that podcasting has had RSS and is available on so many different platforms. But, what we learned very quickly in our research is that outside of YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, there is everybody else. They're just at much, much smaller levels. They're not big players in any significant way. And so, you mentioned Apple, but Apple, it obviously does better among those who have Apple products, but it is much smaller from a consumption standpoint to YouTube and Spotify. And so why it's become a big deal is because YouTube's podcasting presence has gotten bigger. More and more people are consuming podcasts on that platform. Therefore, Spotify decided to get in the game and ascend their aggressive strategy on video. And so it's just reaching more people because more people are on those platforms. And that's the answer to the question.
What's interesting is I think the answer that you gave kind of goes against what everybody is saying is, it's not a podcast if it doesn't have an RSS feed. The only thing that's really changed is the delivery mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
You say the ascension of the 2 platforms, YouTube and Spotify. Well, the platforms is just a tech. It's just they're just apps. But the reason why I think that it's so much of a discussion now is because they're huge apps. I mean,
right.
YouTube podcasting has nothing, or podcast apps have nothing on YouTube's search.
Right.
And the delivery. And for the fact that it's cross-platform, you can put it on your computer. I'm sorry. You can just open a browser and it's on your computer. The app is probably already on your smartphone. The app is probably already on your smart TV. It's already there. It's just like radio. You get a car, it's going to have a radio in the dashboard and you can just tune into a station. You don't have to do anything. Whereas with a podcast app, you've got to go, you got to search for the app, you got to download it, you got to sign up for an account, then you got to start finding your shows. So YouTube's definitely got an advantage over that. And I think Spotify too, because it's been around for, at least 2 decades as a music platform, a listening platform.
It's simply making it easier for more people to find podcasts. That's right. And a few of the things you mentioned are really key. YouTube is just it's used for everything. So if how many times have you used YouTube to find out how to fix something, right? Yep. How do I get my dryer to stop spinning? And go to YouTube
you've been reading my mail. We have a problem with our washer dryer over here. It just goes on in the middle of the night for no reason.
Well, no, there's an actual thing that I looked up about 3 weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It probably happens to a lot of people, right? So I looked up this video. So you're there. It serves you other things. It could serve you podcasts, right? So absolutely, it's just that big of a platform, and it has that power to bring people in because they're already there doing other things. Number one. Number two is discovery, which I know we'll get into social media a little bit later, but it's an important point to make now in relation to what we're talking about, which is, the top 2 discovery platforms are YouTube, not surprising, and Shorts, a little bit surprising.
Not me.
Not for you.
Surprised me a bit. I always wanted the videos that were 10 minutes to be 2 minutes long.
Yeah.
That's all it
Yeah.
needed. It didn't need to be 10.
Right. And you can link to a full episode from Shorts. So it stays in the YouTube ecosystem, and it builds on that power. So all of those things, really make sense for why more and more people are using the platform for podcasts, even though, to your point, video has been around. It's just it's the mechanism of how they're finding it. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the people who are in the audience, I see a couple of you commenting. Thanks for joining us. You can always ask questions in the chat. We'll be bringing them up as they come along if I feel it's applicable to the point of the conversation we're in. I'm going to come at this discussion as, well, this is natural for me. I dislike what YouTube and Spotify are doing to podcasting in general. I don't really have a problem against video podcasting, other than the fact that some people are calling podcasts that aren't podcasts. And we can go in that detail later. But what Jay's going to present here, the 7 key findings you got from the state of the podcast video, let me get it right. State of video podcasting.
Yeah.
As conducted by Coleman Insights, which you work with, and Amplifi Media.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one that I see here is, what's a podcast seems to be settled by consumers. Tell me what that means.
Well, and it's still going on today, and you actually just kind of alluded to it, right? Is the industry has its perceptions and always has about what a podcast is. And I totally get that there's blurred lines, particularly in video or on YouTube, as to what's a podcast and what's not a podcast. And it can be confusing, right? Is it a show? Is it a TV show? Is it a podcast? Bottom line is, consumers, to us, how they define a podcast is all we should really be concerned about. Because if they call it a podcast, then it's a podcast. And the way we asked that question in 2023 was, how do you define a podcast? Is it audio only, video only, or can it be both? And this moved in a staggeringly fast direction in the last year and a half. When we asked that question a year and a half ago, 75% said it can be both. And we thought that was pretty high. That's now 85%. So it's essentially interchangeable in the consumer's mind, whether or not it's video or audio. They just see podcasting completely as a hybrid medium now.
I have my own 4 rules of what makes a podcast a podcast. I'm going to save those for later.
Okay.
But you saw me squirm when you said it's up to what the consumer decides is a podcast, because then it's kind of like me saying, well, I shouldn't be taxed on this. And if I get more people who are like me that say we shouldn't be taxed on this, then we make a decision. And we don't pay taxes on something. But there is a system or a set of rules or laws or at least definitions that say, yes, you should be taxed on this. Mm-hmm. Now, if enough of us get together and we change the rules, I'm on board with that. And I think we might be heading that way, but that's all I'm gonna leave right now. So let's get into number 2 of what your list says. And I somehow have missed it here.
Video isn't just a Gen Z thing.
Oh yeah. Do we even need to discuss that? It's not just a Gen Z thing. What is Gen Z? Gen Z is the years what?
Well, in 15 to 29 was what we looked at in the study. I think it goes a little bit younger than that, but our study started at 15. So 15 to 29. And really, when you look at the chart, and we'll show this when we do the webinar on Thursday, which you can register for at ColemanInsights.com or AmplifiMedia.com, Thursday too. Essentially, the chart, when you look at the way that Gen Z and the overall sample 15 to 64 are consuming podcasts, there's very little difference. There are a couple takeaways from it. One is the percentage of exclusives. The number of people that are using just video or just audio is dwindling significantly. But most of the action happens in the middle, which is they go to both. And we should talk about how they use both, because that's very, very important. And it's very important in the discussion of why people that do audio podcasts shouldn't freak out about this study in general. But bottom line, the number, when you do the math overall, is 77, only 23% of podcast consumers total out of 1,000 podcast consumers in the US, only 23% are doing one or the other. The other 77% go back and forth. And that's a big number. So
That seems to be a
obviously
big
if you're only
change
doing one
too.
or the under. Yeah, big.
Yeah. I mean, that I don't understand. Is that only, how could that be a big change? Such a big change as what it might have been 5 years ago. Is it because now YouTube is putting some kind of resources and emphasis on podcasts where they actually have a way to create a channel that identifies this content as a podcast, or because they're talking about it more and more people are aware of it, and that's why they're
Well,
reporting more of the back and forth?
I mean, that could be some of it, but I could tell you also, I mean, doing some research on, I mean, one of the questions that we ask is your favorite podcast on YouTube, right? That number has
Favorite
gone up.
podcast.
That, right? So I'm asking consumers, is your favorite podcast available on YouTube? There were a lot of, the number was pretty substantial of the people that said it was not available on YouTube. Now that has moved up. More people are now saying that their favorite podcast is available on YouTube. So to me, that is also saying that more creators are putting their podcasts available on video form. Right? So it would make sense.
Yeah, I'd love to see if anybody can throw Zoom up on YouTube, a Zoom
Sure.
recording.
Well, yeah.
We've got the tools now to record Riverside Squadcast, Zencaster. It's all video too, so it's easy just to create a video and throw it up on YouTube. And YouTube's a free platform, so I can see where in the past 5 years, especially after 2020, when everybody realized, oh, there's this video platform, we can record Zoom calls. They can put it on YouTube for free. Free platform is easy.
Yeah.
For it's a low barrier of entry for people. So, but we're talking about the Gen Z. It's not just for Gen Z. I mean, I don't disagree with that at all. I think that makes sense that it's not just, the certain age group. Although, wouldn't you think that more of an older demographic would be part of that only audio consumption for podcasts? Did you find that in the results?
Yes. Yeah. Although it's not, we looked at YouTube. That was actually one of the surprising findings from 2023 was that, and we're talking specifically for podcasts. I'm not talking about YouTube in general. When we ask about YouTube podcast consumption, it actually leaned a little bit older on YouTube. So that was an interesting surprise.
Interesting. Number 3, you say YouTube still has room to grow. I thought podcasting was saturated. Look at YouTube. It's got to be saturated, right?
Right. So, okay. So think about overall podcast consumption. So a year and a half ago, when we did that study, it looked this way. 60% of all podcast consumers were using YouTube for podcasts. And Spotify was 53%. And then Apple was way behind in the 30s. Okay. So essentially you had a neck and neck tie between YouTube and Spotify at 60 to 53. 18 months later, YouTube has gone up to 70%. Spotify's at 52. So, and there's been no other movement, significant movement, little movement, right, of the others. So you've had YouTube's growth at now 70%. That's an amazing number. At 70% of all podcast consumers saying they use YouTube for podcasts, up 10 points from a year and a half ago. It's not coming at the expense of the other platforms because you're not seeing the other platforms really decline. But at the same time, you're also seeing YouTube as the only one that's growing. And so within that, so now you've got 70%, 700 people that say that they're using YouTube. So that's 30% that don't use YouTube for podcasts. So we asked them the question, okay, you said you don't use YouTube for podcasts. Were you aware that YouTube offers podcasts? And there are a third of those that said no, didn't even have any idea. So if you think about from a ceiling standpoint, right, you do still have 30% of podcast consumers that aren't using it yet. And of those, you've got a third that didn't even know it existed. So, there's an opportunity for them to build awareness with those people and still build some consumption, despite the fact they're already as high as they are. It's crazy.
I'd be curious to see how many people you survey that have never listened to podcasts on a steady basis, that they, do they consume stuff on YouTube that might be a podcast, or even Spotify. I wouldn't say Spotify. It'd be easy to tell on Spotify it's a podcast. But I remember in 2014 or 2013, I was speaking at a local meetup group and I was talking about podcasting, and I said something, and a guy in the audience, his ears just perked up, and it totally changed his life. We're still really good friends today because of it. But I said, the people who read your blog or people who listen to your podcast will not be the same people that read your blog.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh yeah, it's a different type of person consuming podcasts. So now we're adding that video component on top of it, which has been there for a while, but more emphasis is there. Plus, with Spotify adding video to their platform, yes, video podcasts have plenty of room to grow. But I like what you said earlier about, I was reading an article from Sounds Profitable. Brian Barletta wrote something really brilliant. I'll try to link to it in the show notes. It's really worth the read. He was talking about how with YouTube, you're getting new audience members. But with Spotify, you're kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You're switching out a listener from one type of medium to another.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, and I thought, that's pretty interesting. Podcasting has this growth mentality of just, steady. And Spotify has a way of getting more people into their platform, but I don't think you're getting people who've never heard of a podcast before suddenly listen to podcasts on Spotify. Maybe you have some stuff that proves me wrong there, but it sounds like, once people realize this stuff's on YouTube, and if you start consuming podcasts on YouTube, guess what? It's going to serve you more podcast content because look at your past history.
The algorithm, right?
Yeah. I just keep confirming everything you said. I've got a comment here from Josh who's in the chat. COVID really pushed our daily video plays. As people worked at home, they got used to having the show play on YouTube, on the TV, while working versus headphones at the office. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a good segue to the next finding. So we'll talk about how people are consuming, which is changing, audio versus video. So we can talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, number 4 is podcast listening hits the road. Is it like hit the road, Jack, or is it no? It's actually tell me, podcast listening.
Yeah. So to Josh's point, right? So it's when you look at podcasting and the kind of the history of the last 20 plus years of podcasting, COVID was just such an interesting time, right? Because it really, as a medium, it's affected so wildly in so many different ways. You had huge at-home consumption. You had all these creators coming and making podcasts that then faded and didn't make podcasts anymore. You had people, watching videos because they were at home because they had time. So all this stuff was happening. And so when we did our last study, so again, think about it came out of the field July 2023. It was removed from COVID, but not hugely removed from COVID. It was still getting back to normal patterns. Now we're back in normal patterns. So I thought it was really interesting looking at the difference. So podcasting audio was always dominant at home. And whenever I looked at research for audio for in-car, it was always lower than you would expect it to be because podcasting, obviously, in audio is conducive for the car. But what we discovered in the last year and a half is when we looked at it, audio was number 1 for at home. Now we didn't ask video location a year and a half ago. So we only asked audio location, but at home was the dominant number 1. And then we also asked, you ask a bunch of different things. Some are specific locations and others are more like, what are you doing? So in other words, you'll have a combination of things like at home, relaxing, walking, exercising, right? At work, using public transportation, et cetera. So just a year and a half ago, dominant number 1 and 2 for audio were at home and relaxing, passive. What's 1 and 2 this time? It's still at home, but for audio, at home has gone from 82% to 71%. And what's number 2 now? In car, up 48 to 56%. That's a huge jump for in car for audio, right? What's number 3? Walking and exercising. Relaxing moves down to number 4 for audio. And so meanwhile, and then you look at video and where are people using video? Well, number 1 at like 88% is at home. Number 2 is relaxing. So the way I look at this data, this to me is if you get worried about audio in podcasting in general, this is the data that shows you everything's going to be just fine because this is the data that shows you that they're complementary to each other and they're simply using it at different times. This is why you make it available to everyone in the different ways, but they're going to use it at different times. And it's good for podcasting in general because this is an opportunity for people to, it's like, meet the consumer where they are. This is the opportunity to be there whenever they need you. And the more people use it on the go, the more they use it on the road. And when it comes to in-car, that number is just going to keep, I think that number is just going to keep going up for audio, because the more people get connected cars, people keep their cars a long time on average. And the more people get connected cars and it's easier for them to connect on Bluetooth, and they learn that it's easy to get to the app right there and connect to an audio podcast, that number should keep coming up. Commuting patterns are back, essentially back to normal. So as people get the habit of using podcasting in car, that's great. So what's happening is video is becoming that at-home medium. People are now consuming YouTube number 2, podcast, smart TV, taking over computer at number 2 behind smartphone, right? So, you've got a complementary, it's complementary. Essentially what you have is audio is becoming more active and video is passive, and if we can get people to use audio in the times when they're on the go, and they can use video when they're in a sedentary state, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. You're concerning me by talking about car, and we're talking about the state of video podcasting here. Yeah. Obviously, if you're driving by yourself, you should not be consuming YouTube or Spotify video. No.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So but if self-driving cars come along, that could be the technology that changes. It just sways it all more towards video. Who knows?
Well, sure. And then there's riding in the car as a passenger and all of that. But, but what I'm saying is audio should be the dominant in-car medium for podcasting.
Yes. So for those people who are creating video podcasts and that's the only product, they're not creating a separate audio, version. Audio has got to be important for and I'm talking to the podcast editors here, and I'm talking about the podcasters who record their stuff with video. Good audio is still very important as part of the content that needs to be delivered.
And I think you're right, Steve. I mean, look, I think the narrative has been so heavy towards, okay, you've got an audio podcast, you've got to do video, right? And but it does cut both ways. If you're doing just video, yes, you should have an audio version as well. I agree.
Yeah. And a good audio version. I don't mean the product has to be that different. I just say, don't be talking to your phone or your laptop, please.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because I do believe that you can allow more things to happen in video that need to be taken out or affected in post-production for audio. For example, you can have more ameras in video because you've got more than one sense working on the content. I'm watching, I'm observing. Somebody says, I'm really not even really paying attention to it. But in an audio podcast where it's, every other word is like, kind of like, right, like, kind of like, oh my gosh, get rid of that stuff. Cause I'm sitting here and I'm focused on the content. Even if I'm driving or doing something else, I'm focused on the content, where the audio product has to be better. It's got to be better. I think that's where, as I started mentioning earlier, and I'll get off my soapbox in about 30 seconds. That was my problem with video podcasts, is that we can allow more stuff to get through because we're creating much more usable content. Whereas if that's all we're providing, then the audio listening experience suffers. Okay. Number 6. I am curious of where you're going to go with this. Social media.
Number 5, I think, right?
Yeah. Let's go number 5. Yeah.
Spotify. Yeah.
Because we're talking about audio. Spotify is still an audio first platform.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at it, 83% of people that are using Spotify are using it for audio. Bottom line, they've got opportunity in video, but it's, when you look at awareness, we asked all podcast consumers, are you aware that Spotify offers video? And about 2/3 are. So you do still have a third of podcast consumers that don't even know Spotify's in the video game yet. One thing I thought was interesting was that the number of people that are using Spotify that know they have video is just slightly higher than that. And you would expect there to be a bigger lift among people that are already in that universe. Mm-hmm. So it may be that they're just not noticing. It may be that their algorithm isn't hitting them with the video podcasts, but they've got some awareness opportunity that isn't quite there yet. But right now, usage, 83% say that they're using audio, with much smaller numbers, 25% that use video, minimizing on their device, and active video is really, really low. So in the sense that it's also, just from a brand perspective, like, let's step away from usage for a second and just talk about brand. It's really important to recognize that YouTube is always going to have the the advantage from a brand perception standpoint. You think YouTube, you think video.
Yep.
And Spotify, same problem with Apple. You think those brands, you think audio first. And if you want to try and change perceptions, that's not something that you can just do overnight. It's something you have to do aggressively. It's something you have to verbally say over and over again. It requires marketing campaigns. It requires tactical efforts. And Spotify may or may not get there.
Yeah, I remember hearing a story about, it was Cadillac and I think Buick or something, or Cadillac and somebody's car was superior, but another person came out and they were heavy on the advertising and marketing, saying we have a better vehicle. And now people think Cadillacs are better. So it takes a lot. You got to be a Cadillac to be able to do that. You can't just be. Yeah.
Well, how about VHS and Betamax?
Right.
That's another classic example.
I never got to try Betamax, but I hear that was superior, but somehow VHS won over.
Marketing. Because they have better marketing.
Yes. Good marketing kills great products. That's too bad. All right. Number 6. I'm going to get to number 6 because I didn't know where you're going on this. Social media takes the lead.
This particular finding is probably the most important one for your listeners and viewers, because this affects the creators and it affects those who do podcast marketing. And so, which is everybody, right? So for the first time in any research that I've seen, certainly for the first time in our research, when you ask this question about how you discover new podcasts, and we specifically asked it, how have you discovered a new podcast in the last few months? We also put a time on it, so it's recent. Whenever you see this research, what's the number one answer? Every single time, friends and family. It's always friends and family. Yeah. For the first time, we see friends and family move to number 2, and social media post or conversation is number 1. I'm not terribly surprised by it, because we've seen the increased usage of social media to discover podcasts. We've seen the rise of the short form platforms. And when you look at the top platforms for discovery, YouTube is number 1, Shorts is number 2, Reels is number 3, TikTok is number 4. That was one that's how they're discovering it. And so social media just continues to rise in how people are finding new podcasts. It was an inevitable discovery, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, with how much social media is ingrained into our lives, it makes sense that it grew. I'm surprised it took so long.
Right.
Yeah. But then we didn't really have, the last 4 years there, in my perception, of course, I'm an old white guy, so I'm not the Gen Z. I'm not an emerging type of group who I just signed up for a TikTok account the other week and I didn't even use it yet.
Yeah.
So I might be speaking out of line, but I have noticed more video content being served everywhere, whereas it used to be images. You have the static quotes. Here's a quote from Zig Ziglar, inspirational quote. But now it's video. It's video, and anything without even an image on, it's just text. It's kind of scroll by, don't even look at it. So they've definitely put more emphasis on providing that moving image type of content in all the places, not just the new ones.
Well, and we've seen, as you know, we've seen a lot of creators that even if they're not putting full episodes of the show on video, they may be doing vertical video, right? They may be doing clips, and it's becoming. I was just at the it was a podcast movement, and then I was at the NAB show this past week, and the NAB show was interesting because you had companies like Opus Clips there that were showing their AI tools to create vertical video, and it's going to be fascinating a year from now to see how this has changed the creator space, because it's making it so much easier to create those videos from the content. So yeah, and also to recognize. So that's the thing is you also are the effect of what we just talked about is also just because more and more creators are using vertical video, even if they're not doing full episodes, right? And we also have to recognize as part of that, and I know this goes to a little of the confusion, but it's what the consumer says. If I don't go to a full episode of a podcast and I only watch a minute of it, do I still say I watched the podcast? Maybe, probably. And that's
good point.
Yeah. And that's in the consumer's mind. Hey, they've watched part of it. If I went to the full episode and I only watched 2 minutes of it, I still watched the podcast, right?
Yeah, and that counts as a download or a video view.
Right. Yeah.
So
It's same way if you went to a radio station, you only listen to it 2 minutes. I listen to the radio station. So it's not any different, but it's an important distinction to make though.
that is a great point. Yep. And for my post-production specialists out there, I've got a service offering that I provide my clients because they don't want to spend $500 per video. You know, they'll spend a couple $100 to get the audio podcast. Maybe we create some shorts from their video recordings, but we're not doing a big full production on a 60-minute video. It's going to get put up on YouTube because most people don't stick around for 60 minutes on a YouTube video. But they get the exposure to that social media, you know, the video shorts. They can use it on Instagram and TikTok and all the other places as well. It's a lot more affordable. We can produce a lot faster. I think it gets a lot of that impact that they're looking for, which is exposure to a new audience. And I'm going to be adding something to, I'm still deciding on this, and this is just some backroom talk for people who are watching right now, but I'm going to be adding something to this audio version, which is going to go out in the Podcast Editors Mastermind Show about the ROI of video podcasts. And then I might even create a video for the Podcast Editor Academy that gives a little more of the details there, but just how much does it take to earn your money back based on some real numbers that I got from a relatively known big company who showed me, hey, this is how much money this video has made. This is how many minutes people viewed and all that stuff. And I think it's going to be interesting, but I need to stop talking because the next one, number 7, I think this is key. YouTube Premium, which is the paid for offering, right?
So this is right. If you're paying for YouTube Premium, so this just like if you're paying for Spotify Premium, for example, that is an ad-free service. So you will not be served ads on podcasts. And so the way that podcasters get paid is, and they do get paid, but it is different. They have a different model for it.
And so when somebody puts their video on YouTube, they have the opportunity to monetize when they hit certain limits,
right?
Through ads that YouTube serves.
Or yes, but they now allow baked-in ads too. But yeah,
well, they allow it, but it's not something that they're monetizing through YouTube.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Baked-in ads is me doing the ad read for BetterHelp.
Right. Exactly.
It's not me having BetterHelp's ad played in my podcast because that's against the terms of service with YouTube, right. And I believe that's the same for Spotify. But so there's the way to make ads. If I put my video on YouTube through that dynamic video, I think it's SIA, whatever, the video insertion. Yeah. But then if somebody's paying for premium, YouTube Premium, they don't get those ads, but you can make a little bit of money if you're in the YouTube for Creators program. I forget what it's called.
I think that's right. And it's some sort of revenue share. And I don't
get
know,
a little piece.
Yeah. I don't know all the specifics of it, but it's interesting just in the sense that it does tip the apple cart a little bit. And the number on, because we asked of the podcasters that, those that are using YouTube for podcasts, what percentage are subscribed to premium? And it was 33%. That's a notable number. A third of people using podcasts on YouTube are not getting ads. So if you're trying to monetize on YouTube, it's just something to keep in mind that there's going to be a decent percentage that's going to be a different revenue model.
We could say similar things about Spotify with the monetization there. You've got to make money through Spotify's ad insertion type of products. You either have to be associated with an agency that uses Megaphone and all that. You got to be part of the Spotify for Creators, or I forget the actual term. Maybe somebody in the chat will tell me how I'm saying it wrong. Whatever program they've got. Yeah. And you got to have 100,000 million hours watch time in 30 days or something crazy like that. What else does Spotify require? But so the monetization piece of YouTube, Spotify, or anywhere else is really reliant upon sponsorship. So if you got a client who's selling their own stuff, I don't think we have to worry so much about about any of that stuff.
Right.
The monetization is something you're doing by having a podcast, by having a product or service people want, and by getting an audience that way, which you're using then the platforms to be able to get people into your funnel.
Sure.
Yeah. But with the YouTube Premium, Spotify, they have their paid plan that also doesn't include ads there. Yeah, that's going to be, you're right. It's the complexity of it is a lot different than with traditional RSS feed podcasts, because you could charge people for every download, the CPM model, 1,000 downloads, you get $50 or whatever. Or dynamically, which is kind of the same thing, but then you can swap out the ad after a certain amount of time or a certain number of plays. You can't measure that with Spotify or YouTube. Not yet.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any hint as to when those things might be coming, where you can actually do dynamic insertion video on Spotify and YouTube that isn't video from Spotify and YouTube?
Yeah, it's not an area I can get into the weeds on yet, and I'm sure it's continuously evolving as well.
Yeah, and I don't know why they would. I mean, why they wanted to make the money on people on their platforms, and I think that's kind of the crux of it all. Yeah. Okay, so we've got Dead America here says video helps your growth if done right. 100% if done right. If you're throwing your Zoom recordings up on YouTube, you're not doing it right. I do tend to watch videos on YouTube when I'm at home relaxing, and they're long form podcasts. I wonder how much time is spent with the eyes on the screen, because there's going to be some, but not an hour maybe.
Emma Sweet, who was in podcast strategy for YouTube, she was on a panel with me at the NAB and was on a webinar that I recommend everybody watch, that YouTube put out a couple of weeks ago about, it was an AMA on YouTube's algorithm for podcasts, and it's a must watch. So I don't know the website address. I'm sure you can look it up and then link to it if you want in this. I think that would be a great idea. You could Google it, but
I want to, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but it was her and Stephanie from YouTube, and it was very actionable, and they talk about several different tactical things that you can do for your podcast on YouTube. Couple of the interesting takeaways for me from that was, one is that they kind of bash the perception that the algorithm is based on you trying to game the algorithm. It's really the algorithm determining what to serve the consumer, right, based on their behavior. So it's really germane upon you to create the right engaging content for your audience. And then they have all these engagement metrics. One of the interesting things too was that that long form content that was just mentioned, that is something that has now been, more recently a net positive, where long form content, as long as it's engaging, can be a very good thing.
As long as it's engaging, absolutely. Which we go back to content is king.
Yeah.
Back to content is king. None of this works if the content's just average.
Yeah, and it's also show by show. Like they made a point to say that it's not like, I think sometimes creators get nervous that the show is somehow going to be penalized. In other words, is my channel or my show, am I not going to be able to grow if I had 50 views in this episode, am I never going to get to the promised land? And, they'll make the point that, and I've seen it. I've seen a show that I work with go from 50 views to 100,000. It happens. And they've been at that level because the algorithm kind of figured out that the right audience was being served. And so the point they'll make is, no, you could go from having very few views to having the biggest video in YouTube tomorrow if you have the right video that's serving the right audience.
And I've certainly heard stories about people who've had videos out for 3 months and then all of a sudden it just hits. And it's because YouTube found the right audience for it. Mm-hmm. Or something has changed where people start to search for something that might have been an anomaly in the past, but now becomes a little more, politicized, I guess, exposed.
Yeah.
Man. So the state of video podcasting is growing. It obviously has more awareness. It's complicated with the monetization of it all. But I think, as far as looking at exposure, people ask all the time, do I need to have video for my podcast? What is your answer to that question? I'll give mine after.
Well, the answer is yes, in the sense of using it for discovery. That's a 100% yes.
Mm-hmm.
There is no show that can't benefit from using video for discovery. But does every show need a full episode? No. And there are certain categories that aren't as conducive to it. And that's something that, like narrative storytelling, for example, can be harder to do. And you totally get that.
Yep.
And there have been plenty of podcasts that have been successful with audio only and are using video successfully for discovery. That said, do I think most categories can benefit from full episodes? Yes. And so, but you need to determine what's right for your podcast, and you need to determine how to best use it. And the other thing I would say is, whether or not you decide to use video, lean into the behavior of your consumer. Like, how are they, learn how they're using it. Really research your target audience if you can, and understand how they want to consume your podcast, and then serve it to them in that way and lean into it. And if audio is really strong and where they're consuming it is really strong, then lean into it.
Yes. And I would add on to that. When somebody's talking about, should I have video on my podcast or video for my podcast, either as shorts, yes, definitely. Mm-hmm. Since it's so easy to get, and we got these tools that you capture the video when you're recording. Hopefully we're using those. We've got tools like Opus Clip, Minvo, and those others that are creating these shorts very easily, giving you a whole variety of them. That's very inexpensive and doesn't take a whole lot of time. The cost is low. It takes no time at all. But then, where was I going with this? Adding video. But the underlying question is, how can I get more of an audience? And if you've been doing audio only, you're going to get more consumers, more exposure by doing video.
Yep.
Just like I told the guy, you're going to get a different audience listening to a podcast than they are going to read your blog. It's the same question. Somebody says, I want to, grow my audience. What do I need to do? Do I need to do video? Yes. And you need to do direct mailing. If you're really into it, you're trying to grow an audience, do direct mailing. I mean, but the cost and all the energy that you're putting into it, is it worth it? That's the big question, I think, is underlying all of this. But video's on the rise, just like you said.
Yeah. And it's funny, I listen to more audio podcasts than I watch video podcasts because I tend to listen to podcasts when I'm on my walk or when I'm in my car. So even though the guy doing research on video podcasts, I tend to be more of an audio consumer. And I've discovered, that said, like I fit into that model. I've discovered podcasts on video that I don't watch the video version. I tend to listen to the audio version, and it kind of reinforces what you just said.
Yeah, I think you did just put out an article. What did you call it?
Video podcasting is not killing audio.
Yes. And you're going to talk us off the ledge or something like that. So I'll put resources for all of Jay's stuff in the show notes eventually. I don't know where Ken came from. I'm sorry. Is there somebody in the chat named Ken? Excuse me. I'm not trying to ignore the viewing audience here, but and I'm going to be creating that extra content for the people who listen to the Podcast Editors Mastermind Show when it comes out. I don't know when I'm going to get this out, but I want to get this content out right away with this live stream with Jay Nachlis, the 7 key findings of the state of video podcasting today. And you do have a webinar coming up, which is going to have a more streamlined presentation for this. Now, you said ColemanInsights.com, which I'm going to put up on the screen here so everybody can see. I mean, it's pretty easy to spell. Is there a certain landing page for that where I can send people to register for this webinar on April 17th?
So right now it's right at the top of the homepage. You'll actually see a little banner that has the link to register for it. So it's very easy to find. It is Thursday, April 17th, 2 p.m. Eastern. And right after that webinar, we will make the report available. So you'll be able to download it for free, no problem. Also at our website, ColemanInsights.com, there's under resources, there's industry studies. So you'll see that. On Thursday, you'll be able to go and download it. And on Steve's website too, amplifimedia.com, they will have it there as well.
Steve, what's his last name?
Goldstein.
Goldstein, yes. Okay. Before I go.
Yes.
Before I let you go, if you have time, what is Pod Predictor? Explain that to me. Explain it to the audience. What is Pod Predictor?
So Pod Predictor is essentially A/B testing for podcasts. So if you are in it's generally good if you're in the pre-launch phase and you're trying to come up with names of a podcast, elevator pitches. It also works for testing show art. You could test trailers. It's essentially you've got a bunch of ideas and you want to throw them out there before you launch the podcast. We've got 500 podcast consumers that we can test it with and see how it measures. It doesn't just work for pre-launch. I mean, you could use it for existing podcasts too. Certainly trailers, right? There's no reason you couldn't test a couple trailers against each other. But that's what it is. It's A/B testing, not AI. Real podcast consumers will take a look at your ideas and let you know what they think of it.
That's interesting because that's serious now. You're talking about, I got to do this. I'm going to do it right. I'm going to put the resources behind it. That's excellent. So that's also at ColemanInsights.com.
It is. They can get in touch with me directly. My contact information is on the website. My first name and last name at ColemanInsights.com is my email address. And yeah, it's one of those that think of it as risk mitigation. As you pointed out earlier, podcasting can be a big investment, and you're going to invest a lot of time and effort and money. And this is an opportunity to throw a little bit of money at it, to know that you're in a better direction before putting all of the time and money and investment into it.
That's an excellent service. I love that. Okay, Jay Nachlis from Coleman Insights. Things for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been fantastic. Thank you and Steve for the survey, for these results. And I'll be definitely pointing people to the live webinar April 17th, 2025 through links in the show notes.
Super. Thanks, Steve. Enjoyed it.
Great. I'm going to put you in the back room, but you can take off if you want. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys for watching, and gals for watching the Podcast Editor Mastermind Show. This has been a special live stream just because this was timely information. Just completed the survey not even a couple weeks ago. Presented Podcast Movement Evolution. So going to be doing the live webinar April 17th. I want to get this out right away because I felt it was very important. Even though we've been talking about video podcasting for a couple of years, I think it's kind of neat to see all of the results that are coming from that survey, and definitely the key moments or the key points that he brought up. I always look at YouTube as a social platform. People look at it as a video platform. For me, we're using it as a social platform to get more of that exposure. So thank you all for showing up. Thank you, Boomer Podcasts. I don't know what froze on. Demographic available for AB-ness. Go to the webinar. I think you'll find out more. Appreciate you guys all showing up. Thank you very much for listening or for watching. And I will be making that extra bonus content for the audio podcast for the Podcast Editor Mastermind Show. And then probably a special bonus video piece to this recording for the Podcast Editor Academy, which you can find at podcasteditoracademy.com. We will be opening up the doors here on April 16th, actually the day before Jay's webinar. We'll be opening up the doors again to accepting new members. If you want to get the announcement for when it does open, make sure you subscribe to the podcasteditoracademy.com/newsletter. That's where I give all kinds of information and resources for people who are in the podcast post-production space and about the Podcast Editor Academy. So, in fact, I just released one that we were talking a lot about legal stuff, about scams. We talked about the BOI thing, which is no longer an issue. And we talked about my my dealings with the IRS and trying to get an amended return accepted and processed before April 15th. Hasn't been fun. Appreciate you all being here. Thank you very much. Have a great day.